by welcoming you to the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome, Tom. I'm glad to be here.
So, Dr. Spiegel, can you tell us how, I think it's an interesting story, how you found hypnosis and how that was involved in your family from the word go. So yeah, I'd love for our audience to learn about that.
Sure, Tom. It's something of a genetic illness in my family. My dad was in training. I'd gone to medical school, was in training as a psychiatrist. And at the time, anybody wanted to be a psychoanalyst. So he was getting psychoanalytic training. And it was also around the time of Pearl Harbor. And he was getting ready to be shipped overseas as a battalion surgeon. Actually, they needed docs on the battlefield. And his analyst, who normally didn't say much of anything, said, "Hey, would you like to learn about hypnosis?" at the end of his analytic session. And my father was shocked and wondered if he'd said something during the session that made the analyst think he needed it. And he said, "No, there's a Austrian psychiatrist who can't himself serve because he's not an American, but who knows about hypnosis and wanted to train young army doctors." A guy who was named Gustav Schaffenberg. And he was a forensic psychiatrist who had smallpox as a kid. It was before we had the vaccine. And he had a big spot right in the middle of his forehead from a smallpox lesion. And he noticed that when he was talking to prisoners, interviewing them, suddenly they would start staring at the spot on his head and their eyes would close and they'd go into some kind of altered mental state. So he got interested in that and started studying hypnosis. And so he taught my father and a number of his colleagues, and my father wound up in combat using hypnosis to help people with acute pain when they had been wounded. He used it to help people with combat stress reactions. There was one soldier who suddenly lost the ability to move his legs. And he first examined him for an injury, couldn't find one. And it was a forced retreat. They were being overrun, and it turned out that one of his buddies was mortally wounded, and he felt terribly guilty for leaving his buddy's body. And so my father hypnotized him and said, "I want you to picture your buddy's image now." And he starts to cry. He's very upset. He said, "I want you to notice something. He's face down. His boots are pointing down, which means he's already dead. There's nothing you could do to save him." And the guy started walking again. It was what we would call a conversion disorder was one in which he was just sort of, without thinking about it, telling his body, "You can't move because you shouldn't leave your buddy." So he found it very helpful. And when he came back to the States, he was ordered by one senior analyst to stop using hypnosis because Freud started his career with hypnosis but stopped using it. And who are you to do something that Freud decided not to do? And then he had a wonderful supervisor named Frieder von Reichmann, a famous analyst, who said, "What are you so precious about your reputation for? You're just starting your career. You're going to teach a course on hypnosis at the Analytic Institute. And I know you're going to do it because I'm going to take it. I want to learn about this." So that got him to continue using it. And he began to find that he was getting better results in a few sessions of hypnosis than in weeks or years of daily psychoanalysis. And so gradually he switched his career. As you can imagine, the dinner table conversations were pretty interesting. And every once in a while, when he was making a teaching film, I would get to watch him use hypnosis, and it sure looked interesting. And so when I got to medical school, I took a hypnosis course at Mass General Hospital. And I still remember the day that I think determined that I was going to work on this as a career. I was at Children's Hospital in Boston, and a nurse said, "Spiegel, your next patient is down in room 362, and she's an asthmatic in status asthmaticus. She can't breathe properly." And I could follow the sound of the wheezing down the hall. And I get in the room, and there's this pretty 15-year-old redhead, bolt upright in bed, knuckles white, struggling for breath. I can hear the wheezing. Her mother's standing there crying. And we had tried subcutaneous epinephrine a couple of times. It hadn't worked. I didn't know what to do next. They were talking about putting her under general anesthesia and starting her on steroids. And I said, you want to learn a breathing exercise? And she nodded. So I got her hypnotized, and she closed her eyes, and she was seeming to go into some kind of a different mental state. And then I realized I hadn't gotten to asthma in the course yet, and I didn't know what to say. So I just said something very sophisticated. I said, each breath you take will be a little deeper and a little easier. And within 5 minutes, she's not wheezing anymore. She's lying back in bed. Her knuckles aren't white. Her mother stopped crying. The nurse ran out of the room. And my intern came to find me, and I thought he was going to pat me on the back and say, nice job, Spiegel. He said, the nurse has filed a complaint with the nursing supervisor that you violated Massachusetts law by hypnotizing a minor without parental consent. And Massachusetts has a lot of weird laws. That's not on the list. And her mother was standing next to me when I did it. He said, well, you're going to have to stop doing this because, and I said, why? He said, it's dangerous. And I said, well, you're going to put her on steroids and give her general anesthesia, and I'm talking to her as dangerous? You know, I don't think so. He said, well, you're going to have to stop doing it. And I said, well, tell you what, you can take me off the case if you want, but as long as she's my patient, I'm not going to tell her anything that I know isn't true. Now, she'd been hospitalized every month for 3 months in status asthmaticus. She had one subsequent hospitalization, but then went on to study to be a respiratory therapist. And the intern went and talked to the chief resident and the attending over the weekend to decide what to do. And they finally came up with a radical idea. They said, let's ask the patient. You know, I don't think they'd ever done that before. And she said, oh, I like this. So we kept doing it. And she did extremely well. And I thought that anything that can help a patient that much, that fast, that safely, and violate a non-existent Massachusetts law and frustrate the head nurse had to be worth looking into. So I've been doing it ever since.
You mentioned psychoanalysis there. I'm interested in the kind of the overlap between them. Where does one become the other? Are there any like kind of big differences? Is hypnosis an offshoot of psychoanalysis? Are there any kind of differences that we need to be aware of?
Oh, there are big differences, but actually Freud did begin his career with hypnosis, and where the common ground was the idea of exploring parts of the mind that are not immediately accessible to consciousness sometimes. Now, and Freud was doing that. He, in fact, in his autobiography, he wrote, I was helping a young woman by tracing her attacks of physical problems to some traumatic memories. And so he had learned to put people into a state of hypnosis and help them go back and recall things that they may or may not have thought about consciously. He said during this hypnosis session, one of them, she reached up and tried to hug me and give me a kiss. And he said, I was modest enough not to attribute this event to my own irresistible personal attractiveness. And I discovered the mysterious element at work beneath hypnosis. That, to him, was transference, the idea that we have feelings about people in our present life that relate to feelings we had about people earlier in our life, like mother and father and siblings and things like that. And that's why psychoanalysis, and he in order to deal with this, he decided instead of using hypnosis, he would sit behind the couch. We had a couch in analysis because he was using it for hypnosis originally. And he would have people then talk about their fantasies and feelings and project them onto him. And he would be a kind of blank screen on which they would project feelings. And the feelings they had about him, he figured, must have something to do with the way they grew up and were raised by their parents. So he focused on developing a deeper understanding of the sort of relationship patterns that you thought of while you were lying on the couch in hypnosis. And that would teach you something about the problems you have, the distortions you have in the way you see and experience people now based on your early life experience. Now, so the analysis moved away from the use of the state of hypnosis itself in the direction of learning and understanding more about the relationship patterns you had acquired as you grew up. Hypnosis can be used, though, to get people into an altered mental state and change the way they focus on things, the way they manage their emotions in their body. So it was a real divergence in the understanding of what psychotherapy ought to be. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. They're just rather different, but they started with the same ability to alter your mental state.
It seems like the psychological world is coming round to altered states more frequently now. If you look at the psychedelics coming into psychotherapy,
Yes.
If you look at breath work, meditation is kind of, you can access altered states. What do you think of that?
I think it's a fascinating point, Tom. I think we have underestimated the importance of our ability to alter mental states. And, the most obvious example is sleep and wakefulness, and, as you help athletes, that getting a good night's sleep is a crucial part of preparing yourself and your body for functioning well the next day. The same nasty email that you shouldn't have read at 11 o'clock at night that got you all upset, and you don't know what the hell am I going to do about this. When you get a good night's sleep and you wake up in the morning and say, oh, I know how to deal with that guy, and you just do it. Changing mental state is a powerful way of changing your perspective, seeing things from a different point of view. And I do think that, for example, the very interesting work with psychedelics now, psilocybin has been used to help dying cancer patients. And, I would have thought the last time you'd want to take a psychedelic, and have the fear of a bad trip is when you're dying, when you're losing control anyway. You think it would freak people out. But I've done work with dying cancer patients for many, many years. And one of them said to me about death, and they watched one another die in the group, so they were facing the worst. And I had people warn me that I'd be demoralizing them because they'd see other people die of the same illness they had. And, death is, however, not a novel concept to a cancer patient. Half of all people diagnosed with cancer will live to die of something else, but everybody who's got it thinks they're going to die. So one of my patients, as we were grieving someone who had died, said, I'm thinking about death in this group the way you feel when you're looking into the Grand Canyon, but you're afraid of heights. She says, if you fell down, it would be a disaster, but you feel better about yourself because you're able to look. That's how I feel about death. I can't say I feel serene, but I can look at it. And people who take psilocybin and talk about their death from cancer say something very similar, that I just saw it from a different perspective. I understood it as a terrible and irreversible thing and a loss, but it helped me to appreciate my experience of being and what that meant, and that I have that now, and I've had that. And it just made them less overwhelmingly frightened of the illness, coupled with good psychotherapy to help them deal with it. And so I see this with hypnosis, that you go into a different mental state, you see the same problem from a different point of view, and it gives you a different perspective. It's not like you're trapped in a bad situation. It's that you're confronting a bad situation, but you can see it from different points of view and handle it differently. And that's part of the power of hypnosis. And breath work too is a similar thing. We're studying that now. And we're finding that people just, breathing is a very interesting thing. And you as athletes think about that all the time. But, breathing is particularly interesting because it's something that we do automatically. Fortunately, we don't have to think about it to breathe, but we can readily control it. And there aren't many physical processes that are right on that edge of control, where it can go on automatic pilot if you don't do anything about it, but you can control it quite a bit. And so I think it's also a pathway into regulating how we control our brain and our body.
It seems to me like altered states, they seem to, in some ways, reveal things that wouldn't, well, we've said this already, that it wouldn't be accessible, but it seems like you peel back a kind of a film or a lens that magnifies it, but that is coming from a man who has very little experience in this world and is clearly an observer. So like, is it that we're like removing biases? Is it that we're removing kind of preconditioned, predetermined films?
Well, it may be. I'd say you're altering biases. There's no unbiased experience or perception. There's always a framework around it. Kant wrote that that it's mainly the passing of time that is the filter through which we have experiences, but there are no pure experiences. It's all processed through our brain. But where I think it helps us is you have them from a different point of view. And so it begins to help you perceive and understand the biases you have when you're in one condition, if you're in another one. And temporal processing is one actually that you change in hypnosis, that when people get deeply absorbed in hypnosis, they often find that minutes or even hours can go by and they're not aware of it in the same way. And that's like the experience you have when an athlete is in a good performance or a musician is in a good performance, where they're not, counting the seconds or the minutes, they're just having the experience. And sometimes they're surprised when it's over, that you're so engaged in what you're doing that you're not aware of the passage of time.
Okay. That's, really interesting. Like it speaks to flow states and experiencing those moments where I get them skiing occasionally when I'm doing well. And it's like, each moment is both expanded and contracted it's like the feel and the sensation is expanded, like you can sense more. It's almost like time slows down. And then throughout the kind of, throughout the length and duration of the spirit, that seems exceptionally short. What's happening on I suppose, biological level when we go under hypnosis?
Sure. And I've heard Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote the book Flow, talk about these flow states. And one of the things he mentions is they're autotelic experiences. They're things where you do it just because you love doing it. It's not that you have to get something done. What seems to happen in hypnosis, and what happens, skiing is a good example. Compared to the horror that Putin is inflicting on the world now, he had the Olympics, the Winter Olympics in Sochi, 2 Olympics back, and there was virtually no snow there. It was kind of like what the story was in China. And so there was so little snow that the skiers had only one practice run on the route that they were going to compete on. And so what a number of our skiers, like Bode Miller, did, where they went up to the top of the run and just stood there, looked up, closed their eyes, and they did an imaginary run all the way down the mountain, every move, every turn. And the American team did extremely well that year. And so what happens in hypnosis is a state of intense absorption. It's highly focused attention. People who are very hypnotizable tend to be the kind of people who get so caught up in a good movie that they enter the imagined world. They don't experience themselves as part of the audience. They experience themselves as part of the movie. And they don't judge it. They don't evaluate it. They just experience it. And it's that same kind of intensity that a good athlete gets into. And that's what our skiers did there. There are 2 other things that go along with that. One is dissociation. So you put outside of conscious awareness things that would ordinarily be in consciousness. So the price of this intense absorption or flow-like experience is that you disconnect from other experiences. And that can be, very valuable in not worrying about things that you don't need to waste mental resources worrying about. And it's why sometimes athletes get injured in the course of a game or of what they're doing and don't even realize that they've been hurt. Until the game's over and the coach says, your right ankle is swollen. What happened? And right now, for example, I'm hoping, Tom, that you're so interested in what I'm saying that you're not aware of the sensations in your bottom touching that chair you're sitting in. If you were, we can stop the interview now. It's okay. But that we do it naturally. Our brain is very good at filtering in what we want to pay attention to and filtering out things we can ignore. And you do that more intensely in a state of hypnosis. The third thing is it's been called suggestibility, but that kind of tends to put people off. I'd say it's more a kind of cognitive flexibility. It's easy in a hypnotic state to see things from the other person's point of view, to not worry or judge, why is he telling me to do this? What does it mean? to just do it and think about it later. And that's where people.
I've just lost your audio.
Huh.
Oh, there we go. We're back.
You got it?
Yeah.
Oh, it says my internet connection is unstable. Sorry. Okay.
That's okay. I missed about 20 seconds, maybe. Ironically, just when you said that I may be losing concentration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. You did. See, it was a hypnotic suggestion. It works.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. My connection looks okay. So I don't know what happened. So what I was saying is, so there are these three components to the hypnotic experience. This intense absorption in the focus of your attention, what you're doing, the way you describe, Tom, when you're skiing. Dissociation, putting outside of conscious awareness things that would ordinarily be in consciousness as sort of the price of being able to focus that intently. And then what has been called suggestibility, the idea that you'll just do what people say. You don't actually lose the ability to say, no, I don't want to do that, but you're less likely to judge and evaluate it. And I think of it as a kind of mental flexibility, the capacity to see things from a different point of view, to say, hey, well, that's an interesting idea. Maybe I should try that, see what it's like. And people who are more hypnotizable tend to be able to go into states like that more. And it makes you more, it makes you a good candidate for psychotherapy because you're more open to, taking in the therapist's perspective and not arguing with it or disagreeing it, just trying it out, see what it feels like. So it's a state of focused attention, dissociation of discomfort or worries or comparisons, or physical discomfort that might impair your performance. It's a suspension of critical judgment that allows you to see things from a different point of view.
How can we, I suppose you're, I'm guessing from the name, your father invented the Spiegel eye roll test. So like, how can we test its susceptibility with that, or like how likely you are to,
This is a kind of rough, rapid guess of how hypnotizable someone might be. There's an old Zen practice, Tom, called looking at the third eye. And what you do when you do that is you close your eyes and you look up to the top of your head. That's supposed to be the third eye. And what you do in the eye roll test is, as you look up past your eyebrows all the way up. And as you look up, you slowly close your eyes. And if you want to try it, I can tell you what your eye roll score is. So look up past your eyebrows all the way up. Good. And as you keep looking up high as you can, slowly close your eyes. Close. All right. So yours, you can open now. Yours is a 2 out of 4. It's basically the capacity to keep looking up as you close your eyes. It's hard to do because you're asking the cranial nerves that control eye movement to do conflicting things, to suspend, to pull your eyelids down while you're keeping your eyes up. It's not an easy thing to do. And we find that it's roughly correlated with your ability to experience hypnosis. The highs, all you see is the whites of their eyes, sclera. You don't see any iris at all. And people who aren't hypnotizable have to bring their eyes all the way down before they close their eyelids. And it seems to be a physical capacity to disconnect from the usual rules and do contradictory things with your eyes. But I think there's something else too. As humans, we're very visual creatures. Our major defense is vision, and the whole back of our brain is devoted to processing visual images. And that's the way we protect ourselves, the way we know whether to fight or flee. There are, dogs and bears smell a whole lot better than we do, and eagles see far better than we do. And many animals can hear far better than we do. But our vision is, for us, our predominant safety sensory experience. And we think that it's the capacity to remain conscious, not go to sleep, because the other thing when you're changing your eye positions is when you go to sleep, you're being alert, but turning inward. And we think it's a way of measuring quickly how much people do that.
Can you train it?
You can train people to use hypnosis better, but you can't really change the eye roll very much. People just can't do it. They can do it, or they can't.
you can train how effective you are at getting into hypnotic states, right? But you can't, like, but it's still going to be a challenge to some people and easier for other people.
Yes, that's right. Hypnotizability itself is a very stable trait. It's by the time most 8-year-old kids are in trances all the time. You know, you ask your 8-year-old son to come in for dinner and he's outside playing. He doesn't hear you. You know, and that's why for children, work and play are all the same thing. You know, they just, in fact, it's a shame that we turn them into little adults before they should, because they just enjoy everything they're doing. You know, they get absorbed in it. But in adolescence, as we learn what the psychologist Piaget called formal operations, you learn to sort of put thinking and logic higher on the hierarchy of experience and just pure experience lower. So you have to understand and explain things. That kind of thinking is less hypnotic-like. And by the time you're 20 or 21, your degree of hypnotizability is what it's going to be by the time you're 50. There was a study done at Stanford, former undergrads who had their hypnotizability measured in their Psych 1 class were blindly retested to the original score, and there was a 0.7 test-retest correlation. Now that's more stable than IQ is over a 25-year interval. So you can't change your hypnotizability much, but you can change how you use it. And there are about a third of adults who just aren't very hypnotizable. And for them, I often say, let's do something else. But about 2/3 are at least somewhat, and about 15% extremely hypnotizable. And it's more how you use it. So I change the strategies I use based on the degree of hypnotizability that I've measured, with not just the eye roll, but a whole 5-minute test that we call the hypnotic induction profile that I can administer remotely on Zoom or in person. And it helps me guide people differently. So if you're very hypnotizable, I just say, let's just go there and do it. And here's how you do it. And they do it. For less hypnotizable people, it's more a mixture of cognitive, behavioral kind of approach with the shift into the hypnotic state. And it's more gradual and structured, but you can still make very good use of hypnosis.
For those who are wanting to try it out, what kind of benefits could athletes, I suppose, accrue from it? And I suppose we're looking at two different elements of it. There's the performance-based element, and then there's the kind of the mental health element too.
Sure. The performance-based element is basically, you can use hypnosis to mentally rehearse and practice what you want to do and how you want to do it. Very often athletes are inhibited from their peak performance by sort of extraneous anxieties or concerns that impair their brain-body connection. If you're worried about how you're performing, you're probably not performing as well as you could. And an example was that the coach of the Stanford women's swim team, which is very good, noticed that some of his best swimmers were swimming better times in practice than they were in meets. Now, you tend to think that, you know, the meet, your best is going to come out when you have to perform, but good athletes know that that's not always the case. And he found that they were, you know, and swimming is an interesting competitive sport in that it doesn't really matter what your opponent is doing, you know, and that's different from water polo or basketball or football or anything else. You know, it really doesn't matter. You know, she's just swimming in the lane next to you. But they were distracting themselves from wondering how they were doing in comparison. Now, sometimes that competition, you know, can stir even better performance from you, but sometimes worse. Sometimes you think, oh my God, you know, she's, you know, half ahead of me, and she's gaining on me, and you know, you instead of swimming better, you swim worse because you're worried about her instead of connecting as well as you can to your own body. So I had them go into a state of self-hypnosis and practice doing their best race. And just go over and over. You focus on what you're for, not what you're against. It's one of the things that people who use hypnosis know. You know, the worst thing to say to someone is, don't think about purple elephants, right? You know, that's what you think about. So don't let her get ahead of me. You know, oh my God, she is ahead of me. And instead of focusing on how you connect with your body and how to get your body to do its best, you're now worrying about what she's doing. And so they found that it was helpful to them to practice what you want to do, not what you're afraid of, help them to swim better and swim faster. So that's one example where you can use hypnosis to focus on sort of experiencing in your mind the best performance you can do, and then doing it, affiliating with your best rather than worrying about your worst. And hypnosis can be very helpful with that. Now, in terms of training, it can help you just kind of program yourself to do what you want to do the practice you want to do. It can be very helpful to getting to sleep, that you can learn to, physical arousal and tension is very important when you're an athlete competing, but it's an enemy when you want to go to sleep. And yet sometimes, we evolve to fight or flee if we're threatened. And if you're trying to sleep, but you're worried about something, your body naturally tenses up, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your cortisol goes up, and it makes it harder to sleep, not easier. So you can learn in hypnosis to use the dissociation to separate your physical experience from your mental experience. So I have people go into a state where they imagine they're floating in a bath, a lake, a hot tub, or floating in space. Get your body comfortable there. And then picture in your mind's eye an imaginary screen, like a movie screen, TV screen, or a piece of clear blue sky, and picture on it what it is you're thinking about, as if you're watching your own movie. But with the rule that no matter what you see on the screen, you keep your body floating and comfortable. And just the ability to control your physical arousal allows you to experience whatever thoughts you're having without interfering with your ability to sleep.
Seems like right there's parallels in meditation and in learning to see your thoughts and emotions as something you experience as opposed to something you are. And that seems to bring a kind of a degree of separation or dissociation, I suppose is the word, where you are kind of, not absorbed by your state and you can observe it.
Yes, to that extent, the sort of open presence, non-judgmental awareness that you cultivate in meditation is something like this ability to focus and dissociate in hypnosis. In both cases, you're not fighting the thought, you're allowing yourself to experience it, but in a different way. And the fact that you're not fighting against it actually helps reduce the physical arousal as well. So it's related to mindfulness. It's not the same thing, but it's similar.
Okay. Is there a way that it seems like a lot of the problems that we encounter when we're working with athletes is that kind of overthinking, essentially? How would an athlete deal with overthinking through hypnosis?
Well, you can use it as a sort of comforting preparation state in which you can put yourself into a state of self-hypnosis and practice what you're going to be doing, the competition or the athletic experience you're going to have. And rather than overthinking often involves kind of anxiety about not doing it just right or making this mistake or that mistake. And you can use it instead to focus on what you're for, not what you're against. To say, you can, for example, if you're a runner, you can go back and rerun your best race. You can just feel what you felt when you took off from the starting blocks, and as you were moving, as you were building speed, as you were maintaining speed, how in tune with your body you felt. And find it an enjoyable, not a pressured experience. Because when you're really performing at your best, you're in tune with your body, you're in sync with it, you're helping it do what it can do. And if you focus on those kind of paradigm experiences where you felt really good doing what you were doing, you'll probably do it better. And so hypnosis can help you prepare for and prime yourself to run your best race.
What about mental health? What about the kind of the general day-to-day mental health?
Well, it can be particularly helpful for stress and anxiety reduction. It can, very often we compound our mental discomfort by worrying in a way that is not particularly constructive, by allowing yourself to kind of immerse yourself in self-doubt or self-criticism. And it can help you to separate your physical from your mental arousal when you do that. And just, I sometimes have people in hypnosis use a split screen where kind of like the Zoom screen we're on right now, where on one, you keep your body floating and comfortable. And on one side, picture a problem, something that troubles you about yourself, or performance you did that you didn't like. But just face it without letting your body get all caught up in it. And then use the right side as your problem solving screen. Say, well, what's one thing I could do to do that better? And picture yourself doing it. So you can visualize possible solutions to an obstacle or a problem that you've had, and think through experience what it would be like to do it differently. Again, with the rule that you keep your body floating and comfortable. And so it can be a way of dealing with, excessive self-criticism or self-doubt, and just seeing things from a different point of view.
Do you have to have done some kind of psychoanalytic or, I suppose, psychological investigation before experimenting with hypnosis? It seems like it works best in tandem, but do you have to kind of know what beliefs are going on, know your limits, or is it something that you can use without that?
That can certainly help. And if you have some perspective on the sort of typical traps you get into, or, cognitive distortions or expectations that are unrealistic, that can help you. Hypnosis is not in and of itself a therapy. It's just a state. It's a mental state of highly focused attention. So there are a lot of therapeutic strategies that can be combined with hypnosis. And if you have some experience of psychotherapy or some understanding of how you got to the problems you've got, hypnosis can help intensify your ability to deal with them differently. On the other hand, it's not necessary. And that's why, I used to think that when I started out, I thought that, people should only experience hypnosis at the hands of someone who is a trained professional. But I realized, having used hypnosis with about 7,000 people in my career, that there are things that I've learned that I think I can share with people who I'm not going to meet. And for that reason, we built Reverie, this digital interactive hypnosis app, where I give a series of instructions to help with problems like stress, enhancing focus, dealing with pain, helping people, with bad habits like smoking or overeating. And we use it in a way that I ask a question in the course of the hypnotic instructions. The person gives us an answer. We use AI to analyze their response, and then they will get the next instruction. So it's like what happens in my office when I'm helping someone along. And so you have virtual me giving instructions based on your response. And we're finding actually that it can be quite effective. And so it can help to have outside therapeutic support, but it isn't necessary. And in fact, people who are hypnotized will go into hypnotic-like states all the time. As I mentioned, getting caught up in a good movie or reading a novel is a hypnotic-like state. So it's a naturally occurring normal state. And it is quite possible to use a technique like Reverie to help yourself learn to use self-hypnosis. And it's always there for reinforcement when you need it. So if people are interested, you can go to the App Store and go to get the Reverie, Reveri app, or there's a website, www.reverie.com, where you can learn more about it. And so it's something that can help people who have had the benefit of good psychotherapy, but we try to structure each type of exercise in a way that makes sense in and of itself, and that people can try and see if they can benefit from doing that.
I'm very much looking forward to trying it. Like I said, new phone on the way. Going to use it. It's on iOS at the moment, and you said it's going to be on Android later this year.
That's correct.
Fantastic. To make the most of that, what do you need in place? I suppose this applies to kind of hypnosis with a facilitator as well. What do you need in place to make the most of it?
Just have some idea of what your problem is and what you want to do about it. Be mentally clear. Don't have drugs on board. Anything that dulls your attention is likely to interfere with your hypnotic
Does that
ability.
include caffeine?
A little bit of caffeine is okay. If you're really wired, it'll just be harder to focus. But if you've had your morning cup of coffee and it's got you alert, that's okay.
Where are the limits of hypnosis? Because like we'll touch very briefly on stage hypnosis and what people think is possible. But like there's also, I think, the belief that it's some form of magic and some sort of voodoo.
Yeah.
And then there's some people who also believe that it's a con of sorts, which obviously it isn't. But like, what are the misconceptions? What are the limits of it?
Yeah, well, I think of hypnosis as being dangerously effective. People are afraid that it's some awful thing, and I don't care much for stage hypnosis. I think it kind of makes fun of people, and but people make fun of people without using hypnosis too. It does play upon the idea that you can sort of take on a new point of view, even if it's an embarrassing one, and act with it. So I don't recommend it. I don't like it. But it's often the experience people have had. Our set of expectations and beliefs allow us to do all kinds of things. We've all had that it seemed like a good idea at the time experience. And hypnosis can be one more of those, but it can be a good idea at the time. And so what hypnosis shows us is that we are more open to and vulnerable to social input, to seeing things from other points of view than we usually like to think. And, that can be a good thing. It's a way you can learn and grow. It can be a bad thing. You can, believe lies. And we've had many experiences in the past few years of large numbers of people believing things that are just pure, utter nonsense. And so that's a part of the way our brain is built and how we can function. And I would say take advantage of it and use it to your benefit. And so the fact that hypnosis illustrates that we are to some extent impressionable and can take on other people's points of view is a good life lesson. Use it for the best reasons. And, a lot of treatment in medicine, the placebo effect it's not as powerful as hypnosis, but it's another example of how just doing something that a doctor asks you to do with the expectation that you'll get better will in part help you feel better, independent of the drug effect, for example. And so, the placebo is one of the best treatments for pain. Hypnosis is an excellent treatment for pain and a hell of a lot safer than the opioids that people are using, including athletes. And so I think it's a matter of seeing it in perspective. Hypnosis gets too much of a bad rap. There are snake oil and lousy drugs too. We don't say medications are dangerous. We just say use the right ones. And I'd say the same thing about hypnosis.
To jump all over the place in this interview, we spoke about kind of performance with athletes. One thing that we didn't touch on is skill development. And a lot of the people who listen to this will be Olympic weightlifters or have some experience with Olympic weightlifting, which is a highly technical movement. Right. Firstly, I suppose, how effectively can we use this? And secondly, is it possible that we can effectively myelinate those pathways and make the successful repetition more likely?
Well, yes, I think there's a rule in neurobiology that neurons that fire together wire together, and there is clearly brain plasticity. We reshape our brains every night when we go to sleep. We, secrete out the detritus of synapses that we're pruning. If we build synapses all the time in the brain when we learn and do things, and including learning control over motor movements. If we kept building them, our brain would outgrow our skull. So we have to prune them. We have to add some. It's called long-term potentiation, but we have to trim them as well. When we do that, we reshape our brains. And clearly, having experiences changes the way our brains are. There was a famous study of London taxi drivers in the days before Waze and things like that. London's a very complicated city. And these cab drivers, knew their way around every one of these crooked little weird streets. And they actually had bigger portions of their parietal cortex where we store spatial relationship information. I'm sure that athletes grow parts of their brain that regulate how they control their bodies. And so it makes sense that you're not just building muscle, you're building brain as well to do the things that you do when you perform at a high level. And so, practice makes perfect. It's good to keep at it, and you will change how your brain functions. We know in hypnosis that you change the way your brain functions in specific ways. We've studied it in using magnetic resonance imaging, and we find that you turn down activity in a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. It's right in the middle. It's part of our salience network. It's a context detector that tells you, oh, there's trouble over there. So when you get distracted by a loud noise or something, that's your salience network saying you better pay attention. There might be danger there. You turn that down, so that allows you to more peacefully focus on what you want to focus on. Secondly, you increase the connection between the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, it's part of our executive control network, and the insula. That's a part of the salience network that controls the body. So it enhances your ability to control your body, and that happens in hypnosis. And the third is you disconnect from the posterior cingulate cortex. That's part of the default mode network. That's an area that you turn down. Meditators turn down activity in that area because they want it. It's a part that involves contemplating yourself, thinking about yourself and who you are. And you disconnect what you're doing from who you think you are. That's how people manage to do things they didn't think they could do in hypnosis, for example. So there are very specific changes in brain function that presumably you can learn to do better. And in fact, highly hypnotizable people have better functional connectivity, functional activity coordination between the executive control network and the salience network. So it allows you to say to yourself, what I'm doing now is the right thing to do. I don't have to worry about it being wrong. I'm just going to keep doing it. And I think when athletes get into a kind of rhythm of practice and performance, they're not thinking, well, should I do it differently or should I do something else? They're just engaged in it fully. And that's when you enjoy your workout more and when you get more out of it as well.
Are there any examples or good examples that you know of the people being able to do things that they previously thought were impossible or too challenging for them under hypnosis?
Yes, I've had, we wrote a paper about this once. We had a young woman who was hospitalized at Stanford who was legally blind. Her visual vision was 20/60. She could barely see, and she had what we call resting nystagmus. The eyes kept moving back and forth, and you can move your eyes, but you can't keep moving them back and forth for very long. And she had what we called a dissociative disorder. So she would shift and start acting like she was a little girl, and she'd had some trauma in her childhood. But we noticed that when we hypnotized her and had her do that, her original vision had been like, 20/200. And in hypnosis, when she was experiencing things as a little girl, it was 20/60. It got much better. She could see people 2 floors down that she couldn't see before. And the nystagmus stopped. She was able to control her eyes enough that she had normal eye movement instead of the constant back and forth eye movement. There is certainly, stories of, people being able to, a mother whose child gets caught under a car, lift up a corner of the car so the child can be pulled out. People can do things in these altered mental states that exceed what normal expectation would be.
Yeah, that's a fascinating world. A really fascinating world. Like, you just think how far that could go. And it just blows my mind. What to kind of, I'd like to finish off by in a moment wrapping up with a few questions that we ask everyone. But firstly, what do you think is the future of hypnosis?
Well, I'm hoping, Tom, that it will not be seen as some weird, strange thing, but be a kind of normal thing, a tool that we use to incorporate in our everyday life and learn how to use our brains better. We're not born with a user's manual. We got this big brain. It's our major evolutionary advantage. And I don't think we use it nearly well enough or efficiently enough. And so I'm hoping that it will be a kind of self-training skill that anybody can and will use to help better manage problems like stress and pain and anxiety, and control their habits, help program themselves to make better use of their time, train better. I think it could be a part of everyday life. And that's why we developed Reverie as a way to teach people how to use this as a wellness skill to help regulate their days better and manage to sleep better at night. And so I think it's a natural, there's a reason why we have this ability. We might as well make use of it. It's not some artificial thing we're adding. It's taking advantage of a skill we already have. And that's why I hope people will use Reverie as a tool to learn how to better manage their brains and their bodies.
What books have you gifted most to people?
What books have I gifted most to people? That's an interesting question. I'm interested in Nestor's book on breathing. I think that's a very interesting book, and I've shared that with a number of people. Csikszentmihalyi's book Flow is a very good one about getting into these altered mental states. I will mention that we've written a textbook for people who are seriously interested in hypnosis called Trance and Treatment: Clinical Uses of Hypnosis. And it's meant primarily for, psychotherapists and others using it with patients, but it tries to explain clearly how hypnosis works. The Dalai Lama has written some wonderful books on being mindful, and John Kabat-Zinn has two, Wherever You Go, There You Are, and Full Catastrophe Living are two excellent books on meditation. So those are things that I think help people to explore alterations in and expansions of consciousness in ways that we can make better use of our brain and our body.
What habits do you perform on a somewhat regular basis for your own mental health and performance?
What do I do for myself?
Yeah.
When I was learning to water ski, I kept winding up with my face in the water. It just wasn't working, and I have better lower body than upper body strength, and it required a lot of upper body strength. And I just hypnotized myself before I did it. And I said to myself, arms straight, knees bent, arms straight, knees bent, because I was sort of doing the opposite. I was pulling back with my arms and keeping my legs straight. And I started water skiing after that. I could just do it, And so when I water ski, I still tell myself that, and I did it in a state of self-hypnosis. And
then finally, where can people find out a little bit more about you and also get involved in Reverie?
So the Reverie website is www.reveri.com, reverie.com. I've published, probably 150 papers on hypnosis, doing research on it, and people can do, lit searches with my name and hypnosis, and they'll come up with a bunch of publications. There are two professional societies, the Society for Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis and the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis, where you can find good practitioners who are fully trained and licensed as mental health or medical health professionals, doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists who use hypnosis, and the International Society of Hypnosis as well, you can find on the web. There are other, more popular sources of information about mindfulness and hypnosis. I would advise people, if you're looking for it, look for practitioners who are licensed and trained in a primary helping profession, and then who use hypnosis. There are a lot of people who are just hypnotists out there, and some of them may be good, but a lot of them aren't. And you want to have the benefit of someone who understands the phenomenon of hypnosis, but also understands psychotherapy, medicine, dentistry, whatever their primary profession is.
Makes sense. One thing I did forget to ask is on the Human Lab podcast, Dr. Human mentions you the aspect of voice and like having some sort of impact on it. And it only really piqued my interest because I've had people say they listen to this podcast because of my voice and they find it relaxing and therapeutic. And there's obviously something about, well, if you look at binaural beats and the way they affect the human brain, like there's something. Is there any truth in that and involved in hypnosis?
Well, I think of hypnosis, Tom, as mostly, a capacity that one has within oneself or one doesn't have that one can use. But I do think that there are things about the way let's put it this way, as social creatures and as social creatures who evolved from, very primitive times, like yesterday in Ukraine, where, the major dangers to you were either animals or other humans, marauding humans. We have to get pretty good at detecting either sources of support or threat. That's what we need, to survive, we had to do that. And so I do think that our auditory senses are prepared to sort of sort through the tone of voice to say, is this someone who is going to threaten me and cause me to have to fight or flee? Or is this someone who's going to invite me to safely turn inward and build my own inner experience? And I like your voice. I think you have a sort of soothing voice with some emotional tone to it that indicates that you're interested and, you're more likely to help than hurt, and I do think that having that tone of voice allows people to kind of put aside their defenses and turn inward. And so I think that helps. I mean, people tell me that they sort of tend to feel that way when they hear me talk. And I hear some of that in your voice too, that you invite engagement. You don't put somebody off or make them worried or anxious. And that's important, I think.
Interesting stuff. I was just going for the compliments at the end. That's all I was looking for.
Yes, well, you got it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Spiegel. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Tom. Would you send me the link when it's up and running?
Absolutely will do.